array of skills from Brendan in the past when I was nurse consultant for critical care. And I've just been reflecting, Brendan, on some of the supervision sessions when I was clearing out. I found all our notes from supervision.
Wow.
So heavily into practice development, PD model, person-centeredness, so on. So that's me.
Wow, thank you. And then Grace. Or maybe not. Grace, are you there? Oh yes, let's come off mute now.
Hello, my name's Grace. I'm a community staff nurse. I'm based at Evelina Hospital under St. Thomas and Guy's Trust.
Fabulous, thank you, Grace. And Bryony?
Yeah, hi, my name's Bryony. Well, as you can tell, I'm an army nurse currently working in Portsmouth. And I think we've just been pushing out a bit more of a relationship between the MOD nurses and the Florence Nightingale Foundation. So I've got a hold of a few links of these upcoming events, and actually I think, well, on the 10th of December, hopefully there's going to be a few more of us online with you, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, taking over, that's what I like.
Joining in.
Yeah. and Lucy?
Hi, I'm Lucy Lewis. I'm a consultant practitioner in frailty in a community urgent response team. We do reactive and proactive care for people living with frailty. I'm also the chair of the British Geriatric Society Nurse and Allied Health Professionals Council. So this is very much really keen to hear what you're going to say. My PhD is around decision making for older adults, their families and clinicians who have a diagnosis of cancer. So I think a lot of what you're going to be talking about it's just going to be really great learning for me. So really privileged to be here. Thank you.
And importantly, she's an alumni.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that bit.
And then Nicola.
Sorry, I just jumped off for a minute.
Nikki, sorry.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I just jumped off there because I'm so over the word COVID. So they just rang me from work for something, but I've cut them all off now, so I do apologise. What would you like to know?
Just a couple of headliners about you, Nikki.
So I'm the chief nurse at Milton Keynes University Hospital. And have been for the last 18 months. Had a very steep learning curve with sort of arriving and then straight into a pandemic. So never had such a steep learning curve as this. I've been in the NHS 33 years, so I've done a number of roles, and been doing the role, doing nursing, being in nursing for a long time.
Thank you, Nikki. And Latifat. Hello.
Good. Hello, my name is Latifa. I'm a critical care nurse at Royal Brompton Hospital, and part of the cohort for the Florence Nightingale Leadership Program, which is on at the moment. Yeah.
Well done. Thank you very much. And Sarah.
Hi, sorry, I'm still at work. Just forgive me.
We love you.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Durham. I'm a clinical nurse specialist in breast cancer at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London, Chelsea. And I've just been part of the cohort for the Windrush leadership that has just literally completed.
Fabulous. Most welcome. Well, there we are. What a great an array of roles and specialties and hospitals and levels of people in their career. So I guess, Gemma, I want to hand over to you to introduce Brendan, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Brendan, and thanks everybody for joining us this evening. And as you know from the introduction to the session, as Greta said, this is a opportunity really for us to have a conversation with someone who's had the most interesting career and journey as a nurse, and as a result of that, I don't want to do the typical stuffy introduction, reading out a biography we found on the internet. I wanted to give you my perspective on Brendan, and sort of set the scene really for this being a conversation where we understand a little bit more about the person rather than the job title, the CV, and all of the different awards and accolades that you will all be aware Brendan has achieved. So for me as a mental health nurse, I started my nurse education in year 2000, and Brendan's work around personhood was really the most influential theoretical principle that was shaping nurse education at the university programme that I studied at that time. But what was really rare about that was that there was an empirical evidence base growing alongside that. So typically in mental health nursing, there's a strong theoretical basis and often a philosophical underpinning, but it's rare that there's tangible outcomes and ways of practicing and being as a mental health nurse that you can start to implement within your own practice. And Brendan's work was really providing that. So really shaped my identity as a mental health nurse. And when I moved into my newly registered practice, this gave me real ammunition. It gave me the strength and power and evidence base to be able to argue for real change in the area that I was working in. And we actually became a nationally accredited practice development unit, and largely because of being able to draw upon that theoretical and empirical basis that Brendan's work was generating. So I owe a huge amount of that early career shaping who I am as a mental health nurse to that evidence base. But I got the opportunity to meet Brendan about 18 months ago, and I must admit I was quite nervous, because actually it's rare that people live up to your expectations when you've read about someone's work and you really ascribe to everything really that's written from that individual. Often you feel a little bit let down when it comes to the person in real life, but that actually wasn't the case at all. What I realised when Brendan and I spoke was that this is a person that embodies everything that he preaches, and in his relationships with the people that he works with, the collaborations, but also the challenges that he makes, it's authentic, and it feels very much that this is a way of being, and that's why I think this body of work has been so influential and successful. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to have this conversation with Brendan, and I hope you'll all join in and pose your questions, and we'll have a great discussion. But I was going to kick us off, if that's okay with everyone. You all got sent a paper an editorial that Brendan recently published called "From Nightingale to Now: Time to Rethink Clinical Education in Nursing." And I thought a really nice place to start our conversation is to ask Brendan, if you don't mind, to reflect on your experiences of that pathway into becoming a clinical teacher, and what motivated your decision to take that route at that stage, and your experiences of that as well.
I certainly can. Just before I do that, though, can I just thank you for that introduction? It has to be one of the most authentic introductions I've ever had. So it's quite emotional, actually. And I hadn't known that bit of history, because I know we met. It's only been, probably less than 2 years since we actually met. And then you departed that job so quickly, which I was very disappointed about. But so it's been a pleasure to know you in that short time, Gemma. But I had no idea about that history, which is really lovely. Can I just check as well? Can you hear me okay without a microphone and stuff?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. I have a headset, but I hate wearing it, so it's best if I can. So thank you. It's just such an honor to be doing this. I feel very humbled. So I'll get down to your question. So that editorial, which I wrote with my colleague and friend, Jenny Newton, who lives and works in Melbourne in Australia. But actually, we started off our careers as clinical teachers together in Reading back in 1987, I think it was. So Jenny and I have known each other a very long time, and I've I've done some work with her since in Australia and stuff. But Yeah, so she was one of the very first clinical teachers both of us together were in that role. So why we wrote the editorial, because actually we've had various conversations. She's very passionate about good nursing scholarship and good nursing theory, and has never waned really since the 80s about the importance of nursing theory and nursing scholarship, and is a really thorough kind of academic in that respect. But as always, like me, taken it from the context of clinical practice. And the clinical practice is, what we have to stay focused on and not lose sight of. And that kind of takes us right back to why I started down that route in the first place. So we wanted the editorial to reflect a concern we have about current clinical education, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as the evening goes on, the challenges we seem to have around clinical education with student nurses, and we decided to do that with kind of a reflective editorial to kind of pose some challenges. Think why is this happening in a way when this was so significant? I got into clinical education. It's a bit of a historical analysis going to happen here, so I hope you can bear with me while it's happening. So I started nursing as a mental health nurse in 1980. I loved mental health nursing. I hated the context of it, and so I ran from it because it was very much the large institutions. It was horrible, and ended up doing my general, which is how I ended up in Reading. I've always been very blessed by some fantastic mentors, always who are these great women who were just phenomenal. And one of them was in Reading, who was this incredible kind of leader in orthopedic nursing, who within 3 months of me qualifying as a registered nurse and knowing absolutely nothing, she is the one who put me on the degree course that Philip was on, and said, you have to do it and you have to be there. So within months, I was being fast-tracked through a process I didn't even know existed. And in the process of doing that degree, there was another person I was doing it with, who Philip might remember, called Ros Crowder. And Ros and I had this amazing idea of setting up a nursing development unit in Reading, which, like in Reading, was never going to be, the center of the universe. But we wanted to model it on the nursing development unit that existed in the Chelsea Westminster. And that we could, the Charing Cross Hospital, the one that was a general medical unit. And so we cooked up this plan that I was a senior staff nurse in neurology at that point. And Ros was a very experienced surgical ward sister. And we cooked up this plan that we could job share a position as charge nurse and ward sister. And that at the time, general management was coming in, and Guy's and Tommy's were the first places that were doing general management. And Ros said she could, go into the other half of her job, could be looking at nursing workforce models, which had been unheard of at that point in time, and that I could clinical teach because I was really interested in teaching. And that I would be the clinical teacher and charge nurse on the same ward, which was also unheard of, which was going to be our ward. Anyway, we put this incredibly zany proposal to the director of nursing and director of nurse education at the time. We didn't throw us out. They actually said, maybe. And actually, incredibly innovatively, they interviewed us both together to set up this post, which was to set up a new surgical ward, where we would job share the charge nurse ward sister position. And I would then be 50% clinical teacher for the other half, and Ros would be 50% nursing workforce developer. And that's how it came about. And it was an incredible learning experience, but also really, really cemented for me that passion I've had ever since for joint appointments, clinical academic careers, all of that, and why you have to join these things together. And it was a great experience. And I met Jenny Newton, who I wrote that editorial with, through that experience. And we did loads and loads of innovative stuff. And we did set up the nursing development unit as well. So that's how that came about. So sorry about the history, but there was a history attached to it.
Thank you so much, Brendan. And it was really interesting reading your editorial around how that model of clinical education has changed and developed over the years. You know, the title of it from Florence from now then to now. And I just wondered if you had any reflections or thoughts on that, and your opinion really on how clinical education is developed over this time.
Yeah, I've got a lot of opinions about it because it troubles me a lot, I think. And where I am here at Queen Margaret's in Edinburgh, we've done a huge amount of work over the last 6 years to become a clinical academy. And what I mean by that is that, so in the nursing division, we're a team now of around 40 academics. We've grown hugely in the last 6 years. So we're around 40 academics. And all of us hold clinical positions of some kind or other. Well, it's about 85% of us. There's a few that don't for a variety of reasons. And we have worked really hard over the last 6 years to create those kind of positions. There's a whole variety of joint roles, of shared posts, of 50-50 or 50, whatever we can get. There's a bit of bartering goes on. We've done a lot of it by getting, so if I give a day a month to the care home where I work, for example, then we've appointed 2 of the leaders from that care home as associate lecturers, so they cover off that time for me, so it's bartering. And we did that because we've had loads of conversations around, what happens to our students when they're in clinical practice. And it's not that the mentors they have, or now the supervisors and all of that, are in any way kind of failing them or not interested in them. And when we know there's problems with getting placements and the commitment from mentors and stuff that's required, but it's more just the sense of, as we wrote about in that editorial, of who is kind of just guiding them through that process on a more continuous basis. And of course, that was the essence of the old-fashioned clinical teacher, that they somehow kind of were standing behind, almost metaphorically as well as physically at times, just keeping that student on the straight and narrow and coming in when they needed to. And with the best will in the world, our current models with mentors and supervisors just can't achieve that. It's just not possible for that to happen. And so what we see are students falling through the cracks continuously, really, and really struggling. And despite all the, chefs and PEFs and all this stuff that was developed, it still actually doesn't solve the problem. And I actually think it's becoming more of a problem now, probably than ever. And I think we're going to see it getting even further. I think the second problem is that we have a lot of people who are doing supervision or mentorship and all of those kind of things, who actually, and I don't mean this at all to be offensive, have been not really schooled in good pedagogy, who don't actually really understand what good learning is about and how to facilitate good learning. And it's a huge ask of people to ask them to do that well, on top of everything else that they're doing. And I think, and Joe might even say something about this, even the nurse consultant model was meant to kind of bring that together with the 4 pillars. But actually, that was even difficult to do because there's so many demands on what people do. So I think there was something about the clinical teacher role, and I'm not one that is nostalgic about old functions and the good old days, because I don't really believe they existed, but there was something about the clinical teacher role that meant they had a handle on where these students were at. I knew those students so well in the context of their clinical work. I knew them less in terms of what they were doing in the School of Nursing, but I knew them when they were in practice, and I knew what they were capable of, and I knew where to push them and not push them. I knew where they might need some protecting and then to go off again. And I don't see that happening really so much now with our students. And I worry about, we worry about it a lot, really, in terms of what's happening.
Thank you, Brendan. There's been a couple of notes in the chat box of people agreeing with some of the points. So perhaps, Philip, if I could invite you to share your view on that with Brendan.
Thank you. Hi, Brendan.
Hi.
You mentioned the clinical teacher, and I had a flashback to the late 70s when I started, and their support, which on an ongoing basis, I know the main tutor I had kind of really sticks in my mind. But as you mentioned them, I was thinking, yeah, that is really what we're missing now. We get students coming to us on placement, and we're slotting them into the working day. We have some notice they're coming, and we have some materials and things we use with them, but there doesn't seem to be that gap being bridged between the uni and the place of education and the students necessarily, which makes life difficult. You know, today we had a student physio from a university who placed them with us. That's fine, but again, you know, how much contact and what kind of feedback are we expected to give to the uni and make sure that they are getting something that is really useful. They may well come armed with objectives and things, and our team again is very good at saying, right, what are you expected to get out of the day today, and let's look at what the objectives are. But there is not that kind of visiting supervision that I recall. Like you, you know, I'm fully aware the old days were not all great, but some of those clinical teachers, now I think about it, were really valuable. So I think there is still a bit of, you know, it's the separation in places anyway, I think has gone too far.
Yeah, I just to respond to it, I think it is something about and that's what Jenny and I were trying to reflect in that editorial as well. It's something about that commitment to clinical learning, and seeing it as something that is special in its own sense, rather than you know, and I've had to challenge this big time where I hear lecturers say, oh great, students will be out in practice, that's us, you know, freed up for a while. And I think, really? Absolutely not. You know, so we banned that kind of language. That's not how it is. That's not freeing up at all. Actually, this is the time when we're meant to be connecting with them and really, really connecting with them. And we have done. So we've introduced a model of clinical supervision for our students where they're met with in practice on a monthly basis as a group with a lecturer, so that and mentors can come along as well, which is modeled on what I did in Oxford actually back in the 90s. So you know, it's we have to get over these kind of things, and linked to it as well is the battles we have, and I do mean battles at the moment, of getting placements because placements can't find mentors. And this idea that somehow mentoring and supervision now is a choice rather than something we have a responsibility for as registered practitioners. So there's a lot of issues about that I think this passion about clinical teaching that we had as clinical teachers really kind of got over in some way, really. Sorry, Joe, I think
is there, I was just supplementary, if I may, just are we maybe then in the clinical areas neglecting to try and make the connection and say, come out and see us to the lecturers? Is that the kind of thing that we should be really pushing for?
I think there is an element of that. I think some of the I think this is a really interesting dilemma, actually. So I think there are some very good partnership working, and we have some great partnership working with our board partners. And you know, I think we generally have really good relationships with them. But I think there's an interesting dilemma, which I have tried to get the NMC when we were going through that whole process to understand, which is that, you know, they talk about, and the new standards are so explicit about this, about it has to be 50-50 shared responsibility between practice and university for the education of students. But actually, when it comes to the crunch, the university is held 100% accountable for the progression and graduation of that student. And so we have to take all the hit when it comes to, you know, finding placements, making sure that learning is okay, everything that goes with it. Actually, when the accountability line, when you pitch it, goes directly back to the university. So there is a problem, I think, with that shared accountability model for student learning and student graduation, because actually we cannot do it. Of course, we cannot do it without clinical partners. But then there's an issue about where does the buck stop in that process, and I don't think that's currently right, actually.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Thanks, Philip. And Lucy, you mentioned, Brendan, in your original response around the potential of the consultant nurse and perhaps the advanced practitioner. Lucy, you've raised an interesting point in the chat box. I wonder if you wanted to share that.
Yes, I think that the essence of advanced practice and consultant practice is that education is obviously one of the pillars, but I think I've completed a consultant practitioner development programme. So actually, the way that we've kind of, by the time you get to like the third year of the programme, all the pillars kind of merge, and the kind of, it's not in silos in the way that advanced practice is. I've taken on the role, I'm just 2 months now in the job, and I've taken a team who not really had much development, and already just from sitting down with every member of staff and doing development mapping with them from band 3, we don't have band 2s, but from band 3 all the way up to our band 7, and we've got an apprentice student nurse and a brand new student nurse year 1. It's become part of the culture in quite a short space of time. So, and I think that's down to leadership as well, isn't it? And it's about passion for your clinical expertise and bringing research into it and service improvement. So you see, I think it's, I think, I'm not saying that consultant practice is the be all and end all, but I think it is a good example of where you can just bring education into everything that you do.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, and that's always been one of the things I'm very proud of is when I was in the RCN, and it's great to hear you doing that. When I was in my role in the RCN, we managed to get the first gerontological nurse practitioner in the UK set up. But it was in the nurse consultant model because there was no gerontological nurse practitioner framework in the UK. It was an American idea. So we set it up on the nurse consultant model, basically. And it was partly for that reason that, you know, these people were able to bring all of those pillars together into one mode of functioning. Those who could do it well did that. So it's fantastic to hear, Lucy, that's what you're actually doing, because that is the essence of what that role is really about. It's being able to, you know, as Bernard talked about, all the expertise isn't separated out. It's impossible to see the different elements of the expertise. It's just all as one. It is that fluid movement that takes place, and that's the ideal, and that's what we want for all of our students, actually. But you know, I think we have lost so much in the UK by kind of letting go of the nurse consultant model in the way it was really thought about, and diluting it a bit too much, because I think what you're talking about is just, you know, fantastic, and that it's a practitioner role, and it's multidisciplinary, and all of that is exactly what we should be striving for.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. And Nikki, you've made a comment there around the challenges that COVID has presented in terms of that partnership working. So challenges and opportunities of partnership working between the universities and practice. Did you want to elaborate on your point?
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, during COVID, lots of organisations were offered to have students that had volunteered to do their end placements. And so actually many organisations didn't take that opportunity up because they felt they had too much on. We took a considerable amount of students, and what actually we learned, it did foster better relationships with the university, and we've offered for them to come in. They seem quite reluctant to come in, which is a bit of a shame, sort of to the point you're saying about going out and making sure your student placements are what they're actually experiencing in practice. We actually decided to give them some additional stuff. So we did some human factors and we did some resilience and all that, and they had a really good experience. And actually many of them have taken posts with us now. And what they actually said was, and I did wonder whether this might impact the way we do training in the future, but they actually felt, because they were part of the ward team, that they got more out of their learning experience rather than, oh, the student's here today, what we're going to do with them. So I think it has changed the way people think about learning. And also the point that I put in the chat was that you can't really have the title of a university hospital or a teaching hospital and not do it. You can't just have an association because it looks nice in your title. You have an absolute responsibility. And I think, you know, the whole sort of political pressure on this is that people should be taking students and should be making sure that they're providing a really positive learning environment. Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant to hear, Nick, what you're saying, and I think it really is the kind of model we should just take as the norm. And I think, you know, that at least in the new NMC standards, at least we have freed people up from having to do, you know, torturous mentorship development over many years to actually mentor, when actually it should be a core skill that every graduate exits with, which is what the intention is now. And alongside that, I struggle with this idea that somehow taking a student, as is referred to, as a choice. You know, it should just, again, be a norm. That is what we do, our commitment to education. So to hear that being described, I think it's exactly, you know, the kind of thing that needs to be profiled and really sold as the kind of models that we have to have in place, because that is, for me, going back to from my Nightingale editorial, that is taking those key principles to now. That is what that was all about, really.
Absolutely. And Joanne's put a fabulous point, I think, in the chat box. It really starts to feel like what you're describing in terms of the education links so much with the principles of person-centered practice. So Joanne, did you want to put forward your point to Brendan?
Yeah, it was really about the interplay between sort of belonging, knowing, psychologically safe workplaces and the culture which the university can't affect, really, in terms of where the students are having their placement. And also then the recent huge turnover of staff and the impact on that in terms of the learning environment. So how can a student have a person-centered learning experience when all these factors are going on?
Yeah, I completely agree, which is and you know, because you and I have had these conversations a lot and done a lot of work on it, because it was really the essence of what we were doing in the Royal, really was to shift that culture. I think that gets to the heart of, I think, where there's some of these problems are that are often articulated as a theory practice gap, which I don't necessarily buy into, or, you know, like university being all theory and practice being all kind of the real world, and I don't buy any of those things. I don't think that's how it is. But what I do think is absolutely critical is that the commitment to learning in workplaces, and that commitment to learning how to create more psychologically safe person-centered cultures has got to be top priority in leadership at all levels of the organization. I mean, we know that, and there's good evidence to show some of our work and others, that psychologically unsafe environments are damaging to patients and damaging to staff. And, you know, it's not something we can ever shy away from. And nursing in particular has a very poor history in tackling it, there's some incredibly powerful evidence to show just how bad we have been at fixing some of those psychologically unsafe situations we've been in. And I was actually talking about this today because I was doing a lecture with health visiting students on this very issue on psychologically safe environments and how we work with them, because they are incredibly damaging. And of course, the reality is that we are putting students in some of those places, and we're expecting them to learn. We're expecting them to learn how to be person-centered, and yet the conditions for them to do so are very poor, and aren't conducive to them being able to embrace those qualities. And that's not to say, you know, that particular staff are bad or any of those things. It's just the way the culture has, in a way, been allowed to to be, and the processes aren't in place to enable those elements to be unpicked and to be redressed and to be developed further. And my concern is that we don't necessarily assess those environments for those kind of things when we're looking at student placements and student learning. We're looking at, you know, supervision and an array of other things. But actually the real focus should be on what kind of culture is this? You know, how person-centered is it in relation to staff? And how is that sustained and nurtured over time? And then where do students go into that? And, you know, so we're in the middle actually of doing a lot of work around this. We've got a big European Erasmus grant to develop the first person-centered curriculum framework for healthcare practitioners across Europe, which we're in the middle of. And that is going on the back of, now I've supervised 3 PhDs of people who are have studied person-centered learning environments in practice, all in Ulster actually, and one here at QMU, and all of them show similar kind of things. You know, the similar traits that they all show in terms of the learning environment for person-centeredness, and fundamentally you can narrow it all into that perspective on psychological safety, so that issue that Nikki, you raised, I think connects with what Joe says about the sense of belonging. You know, that is such a fundamental desire for us all, you know, to have that sense of belonging. And students in particular cry out for that. I mean, they just need to feel they are part of something. And that, if we can create that, then their learning changes dramatically, and we see that. And actually Neil Cook's work in Ulster showed that really clearly, that when students felt they were belonged to the team, were part of that team, were all of these person-centered qualities, their learning just escalated. And statistically, we were able to show that in terms of the scoring that they achieved on various measures that we were using, that had made a significant difference to their well-being as well as their learning. So it is a really powerful issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Shall we move on to a slightly different topic now? Brendan, you mentioned there about some of your international work in this area, and I wonder if it'd be interesting for us to hear a bit more about how you developed that level of connection, relationships, to be able to take what you'd done so brilliantly in a local environment to that wider context.
Yeah, God, where do I start?
Big question.
I guess I've always been driven and very curious more than anything. And I'm very honest about my background. I come from a very poor background, it would be described as now. You know, I'm from a large Irish Catholic working class family. The only one to finish school and the only one to go to university. So I come from a background where, you know, fighting for what I wanted was my norm, really. And that to get it, I had to really kind of stick in there. And, you know, when I finished doing therapy during that part of my life, one of the things I realized was I probably was the most unusual child in the world, because I was the only one who locked myself in my bedroom so I could study, rather than be locked in my bedroom to study, so that I wouldn't get dragged out to do other things. And it kind of reflects where I've been in my life ever since, really, which is that I'm very curious and very driven. And I love people, and I constantly can see connections and where things can join up with each other. And so that really has been how the international work has really fostered. It started through some very early relationships I developed really when I was doing my PhD primarily. And that was with some people where I was in Oxford, and quite bizarrely, actually, there was I was because I was doing a PhD in Oxford in the School of Education, and I was the only nurse, and everybody else had come from, you know, silver spoon universities. We're all silver spoon students, you know, were Durham, Oxford, Cambridge graduates and all the rest of it, and I came from Buckinghamshire College, and so it kind of still continued to emulate that whole thing. But there was this girl who was a moral philosopher, actually, from Tasmania, who really was taken by some of the things that I would talk about in our tutorial groups during my PhD. And we stayed friends for quite some time, actually. And she eventually went back to Tasmania to be a primary school teacher. Quite bizarrely now, actually, and this was in '97, and she emailed me and asked me would I do, and this was how bad, we did a telephone lecture to her students in Tasmania about autonomy, because we didn't do video links then, so it was a telephone lecture, and it was a lecture to her staff and students about, I was looking at, my PhD was about autonomy and Kant and older people in hospital. And that's where the person-centered stuff emulates from. And so I did this really quite bizarre talk now on autonomy and aging and the life course, and trying to convince primary school students in Tasmania that thinking about their autonomy at 5 was a really good idea, and that, you know, how they thought about it at 5 would stand them in good stead when they were 85, and mainly to be radical, because that's what she was, a really radical philosopher. And actually what happened from that was that the local press got hold of it, and it got kind of into the media in Australia. And then some people who had known of me, including Jenny, came back on the scene, who had gone off to Australia and had never seen for years, suddenly got in touch and said, when you want to, and it just started to move. And I never said no to any, but I just thought, yeah, give that a go. That sounds fine. And it just started to build up. But I think the other thing that happened, which you said at the beginning, Gemma, was that I'm very passionate and committed about theory and philosophy to underpin everything we do, actually. But I think it's really important to have the empirical evidence alongside. And so my writing and research started to get published at the same time. So a lot of the kind of theoretical, philosophical stuff also started to appear with an evidence base, which is what you picked up on, and that got noticed. So it wasn't just a nurse theory spouting forth about what was right, but actually was also producing some evidence to say this is why it is important, or this is what should come from it. And it just grew and grew and grew. The person-centered framework, we know, is now used in, is actively used in around 29 countries around the world. It's been translated into 11 languages, and it's underpinning a variety of curricula and strategies. And I just get blown away by just the sheer extent of what's happened to it, actually. So it just grew and grew and grew, and has stayed connecting, and that's still going. We have a large international community who are still passionate about all of that work. So, but it was quite serendipitous and quite bizarre, the first part of it, really.
Absolutely, and I'm interested to hear, Brendan, of some of the challenges that you experienced along the way. And a reason why I asked that question, I think sometimes people can think that that these kinds of opportunities only happen to certain people, or there's something special about you as an individual that's meant that this is the career path that you've been able to go on and gain the recognition. But I wonder if you could share with us some of the things that you've had to overcome in order to make some of these achievements and to build those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, I think. I think what I would want to say to anyone else interested in those people who are doing the Windrush Scholarship or Fellowship or the Florence Nightingale Fellowship, any of that is, it's absolutely open to everyone. We just have to be open to it. And it's just this notion, which again, I've held most of my work based on, the idea of being. What's the nature of our being that we pay attention to? You know, who am I as a person is the key question I probably ask myself every day. And it's the one we all should ask ourselves every day. You know, who am I and how am I being? Because you know, as long as we are open to possibility and potential and transformation, then opportunities stay coming. And it's a very strong Buddhist belief, actually, that you, I don't know if you've ever practiced meditation around loving kindness meditation, but loving kindness meditation operates on the basis that the more you meditate using this particular practice, to learn how to love yourself, and I'm not saying some horribly ridiculous process, but actually which is about knowing myself, the more you are capable of loving others, so the more you are capable of putting love out to the world. And it's that kind of idea is the same thing about being, which is that if you just open to possibilities and opportunities, they come. You don't have to do anything to kind of make them work. They'll just come. And it's quite it's an amazing thing about the universe in that regard. It does happen in that way. But of course, that brings with it huge challenges. And so some of those challenges are deeply personal, you know, in relation to what you might have to sacrifice yourself in relation to it. And some of that I'm not always that proud of, but you know, you have to work with that as well, because it happens for a reason. And some of it, I think, is to do with how others respond to people as who they see perhaps as, I don't know, going too far or going ahead of themselves, or all that language. I mean, the Australians have that great phrase called the tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if you've ever been aware of it, but it's a really powerful phrase. It's horrible, but it's a really powerful phrase, you know, that the tall poppy syndrome is, you know, those people who stick their head above the parapet, have it firmly cut off. You know, like in farming poppies, the idea is to get all the poppies to be equal. And the one that grows too tall, grows too fast, is never going to be a strong poppy. So they cut its head off to kind of keep it down. And the Australians talk about that's what we do to people who are ambitious as well. And I've definitely had quite a bit of that. And that's been difficult because it kind of feeds this idea that, you know, men in nursing are only interested in getting to the top, and that we don't care about who we stamp on the way. And I have personally found that really deeply offensive, because I hope I'm not that kind of person, and I try not to be that kind of person. But of course, it feeds that kind of rhetoric, and it's really disruptive and really disturbing and upsetting, actually. So there's been a lot of that. There's challenges around just trying to manage workload, and it's one I struggle with all the time, because I spend so much of my time. I currently manage about 65 people across 3 different subject areas, and the research centre, and 17 PhD students, and all the rest. You know, and I never think about hours I work. I just work because it's what I love to do, and it's what I am. But I spent so much of my time in conversation with members of my team, helping them sort out their workload. And, you know, they're working over hours, and, you know, they're way beyond their 35 hours a week and all of this stuff. And I constantly have to check myself and not say to them, are you for real? Like, really? You know, you are in one of the best jobs in the world. You're paid a decent salary. You've got as much autonomy as you could possibly have in any professional role, and you want me to try and find a way to cut your hours without cutting your hours. It's like, so I'm in these conversations trying to be really facilitative, and at the same time in my head is this screaming going, you have no idea. And then at the same time they'll be saying to me, well, I can't get to do my research because I've got all this teaching and I'm doing that teaching. And I'm saying all of that because I have always had the belief that, as in my role, the hours I work is irrelevant. It's about what it is I'm trying to achieve. And that either can drive you into the ground, or can really create a lot. And I've been very fortunate in that. For me, it's meant being very productive, and I've managed to sustain it. I'm very honest about the fact that I have burnt out 3 times in my career, genuinely burnt out. And that's for a whole variety of reasons, but a lot of it was to do with not noticing that I had crossed that line, and nobody around me had told me I had crossed that line either. But more recently, that has got better. I can monitor that easier, and I'm much more in tune with when I'm heading that direction and can take more control of it. So those kind of things have been some of the biggest challenges, I think. Yeah, there's probably lots of other ones embedded in all of that, but they would be the bigger ones, I would say.
Thank you so much. And I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts or comments or reflections on what you heard there from some of the people that have perhaps not got their cameras on and have not spoken just yet.
I know, I want to see them too.
I know, me too.
I was when you were talking about the aspirant nurses during COVID, I was wondering about the experience of our younger generation of nurses, and we only saw briefly those 3-4 people who haven't got their cameras on. And I was thinking desperate for an opportunity for them to say what it's like and the experience that they've had within their teams of having these aspirant nurses. But maybe they're on a leadership program because we're trying to encourage them to use their voice. But I don't know whether anyone's got maybe you have, Sarah or Lafayette or Grace or Bryony.
Hello.
There we are.
Oh, I just love your balloons.
Yeah, not my handiwork though, so I wouldn't take the credit for it. It's my colleagues that put it up for our Christmas decoration in the office, so that's what we can do. I mean, personally, my role during the COVID hasn't involved any students or learners per se, but I can absolutely I appreciate the work that Brendan you've done and a lot of what you're saying, because I kind of reflect on my own learning and some of the amazing placements that you go on and you walk away knowing you have learned a lot because you feel you're part of the team and you're appreciated, and that made a lot of difference in terms of how much you also put in, because you feel that you are being valued, and so you put in a lot and you get a lot out of that. And so I think it's really important that in practice we work even harder to encourage learners to feel part of the team, and that's how we're going to get good, effective, efficient nurses in the future. Because otherwise, I think, personally, from my own observation, I think a lot is being put on the academics, and sometimes the practical aspect get kind of left behind a little bit. But also, there's a bit of a gap between blending in the academic work and the practical work as well. And so working together, it's absolutely essential in being able to bring out the best in our future nurses. In terms of COVID experience, I think it's been really difficult and continues to be difficult in terms of working and supporting each other and the stresses that we are having to embrace every day as nurses, but also supporting our patients and families through a very, very difficult time. And I don't, sometimes it feels like there's no end to it. If that's the right way to put it, and that can really get you down to the point of feeling quite depressed about it. But we have to, and it's important that we have colleagues and support networks within individual hospitals, but also away from there. And I think for me, I found being on the Windrush quite good, because every time we met, we were able to talk about these experiences and kind of shared experiences, and that kind of gives you a bit of, in a way, made you feel like you're not in this alone. There are other people experiencing similar things, going through similar things with you, and so that shared experience is always quite worthwhile.
Thank you, Sarah. And Latifa?
Yeah, so I was interested in attending this session mainly because clinical academic, but then with the COVID, with the first phase, it puts an end to students being placed on our units because it's a critical care unit. And so that the to us to it then helped me to reach out to nurses who were what's that called now, brought into our unit to help. And it was both ways. It was psychologically demanding because a lot of people are still scared, but then I think because of that interest in wanting to reach out to the person rather than just seeing people as being nurses and you should be able to handle anything, I got a number of feedbacks that my approach to teaching was better in a way. In this current phase, I think because a lot of people have gotten sort of used to COVID, the psychological demand is not as much, but I think people are now getting a bit lax about PPEs and everything. And so it's that thing of getting to speak up, to correct people and also encouraging them. Yeah, so yeah, that's just been the experience really. But as for the last comment that Brendan made, I'm currently going through that phase of people telling you you're going way too much above your prescribed or current rule. And so it was really nice for you to talk about that. Thank you.
They're going.
I think the advice from the Florence Nightingale Foundation is that's the making of you.
Totally.
Don't give up.
Thank you, Latifa. And Grace, you have your camera now. Did you want to add anything to what you heard there?
I was going to say, I just feel like with the onset of COVID-19, what I'm finding in the community setting is our safeguarding numbers have drastically increased. And in terms of managing the caseload, it's been really difficult. In terms of prioritizing, it's difficult. We're having high staff turnover. So in terms of the students, I feel like unfortunately the students aren't getting the same learning experience that I did when I was in their shoes, because there's been so many changes to the way we're working and staff are struggling to make all these changes and adapt the way they're working. And then to have a student on top of all of that, a lot of people aren't managing very well. A lot of our working has gone virtually. So we just don't have the funding and capacity in terms of students don't have devices themselves. There's huge anxieties about coming into the office to actually physically be right next to a student and be guiding them along and showing them how we do things. But I just feel like it's obviously really important to remember how it was for you as a student and the importance of the placement experience in terms of making sure that you're equipped with the knowledge and the skills of what department you want to take in your nursing career and how beneficial the placement is for each student. So it's been hard, but I feel like with the changes to the NMC, it's difficult because when I was doing my training, the mentors, they nominated themselves in a way. And now it's a thing where the mentors everyone's a mentor. I think they've changed the word for it now. It's not called mentor anymore, but it's compulsory. So what I'm finding is that a lot of staff, they're not very passionate about students. You know, it's something they've got to do. It's not their passion. So it's really hard raising morale and just getting everyone on board. But I feel like with skills from the leadership course, it's just about finding what approach to take with different people in terms of getting them on board. But it's not been easy. It's not been easy, but it's never easy, is it?
No. And the fact that you don't accept it as being easy or don't accept those challenges is a really good thing, because that is what creates the conditions for you to get even more of that to happen. So it's really important stuff to stick in there with those kind of things. And I think the community in relation to COVID-19 has been a really challenging area, and one that for students I think was really overlooked. We've had some really hard fights around things like, you know, students being able to go out on placements in the community because they couldn't go in the car with the district nurse and the health visitor, and where was the insurance, and it took months for stuff to come through around their insurance cover. We've had real issues with them being entitled to the same protection as registered nurses when they're out with them. With the most recent one, which only got confirmed yesterday, was around that they would be entitled to the same degree of testing as registered staff when they're in those placements. So there's been a whole series of things, particularly community focused, that were not thought about in relation to students in those situations. So I think it is particularly challenging in those settings as well. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Grace, for that point. And Bryony, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm obviously coming at this from a bit of a different standpoint.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not going to take you through the whole setup that the military have, but we don't really come into contact with our own students until they qualify, and then they come to us for preceptees. But obviously, there's that continuity of education that then we have. And I didn't say before, but I'm also a critical care nurse, so that's an area that, even if you've been nursing a long time in other areas, well, every area is different, isn't it? So it's bringing that in. But I found it interesting, one of the points you made in your first topic, that we actually are very, very lucky in that we get a lot of time compared to everyone else, a lot of time set aside so that we can educate largely ourselves. So we get a lot of time for additional education and preceptive programs people are put into them, but they do differ. And what you said about having almost the right people in the job, because in the military you're told where you're going to work. So sometimes you can have amazing people who have got the right qualifications, or even not qualifications, just that drive within themselves to want to teach and then to be good at it. And then in some situations we kind of fail at that because someone's been put in and they're in that role for however long. And then that's the other issue that we have, is we have such a transient workforce that every 2 to 3 years you're moving on jobs. So you spend 6 months getting used to it, have an idea of how you really are going to push something forward within an area, and then there's a tour or there's something that pops up, and then you're off onto the next one or handing over. So yeah, it's that there's a lot of barriers, but there are ways that we can come around that. And I think engaging with you guys and other areas that can kind of give that stability is something that we really need to lean into. And actually things going virtual is also a good way, because you're there and we can tap into things wherever we end up as well, if you see what I mean. But yeah.
Absolutely, Bryony. What an interesting perspective. And I find it so fascinating that the retention of nurses within the military is so much higher when you compare it to within. Yeah, absolutely. And probably when we go back to that point that we made earlier about belonging, and there's something very key about how people are made to feel that they belong to a family, I guess, within the military.
But that's interesting as well, because I don't know if we would say that about ourselves and retention. But it's what you can see, because the issue with us is we don't have the roles available for people to. We're based around a very old system where actually you can only stay in as a nurse if you were unmarried and you didn't have any children, because that's what you used to get kicked out for. So sorry, my baby's just walked into the room as well. But we still require quite a lot of work in order to change things to enable educators and people to stay on.
So interesting. You multitask, don't you? Go for it. Thank you, Bryony.
But Gemma, I just want to respond to what Bryony just said. So my last part of my NHS career just a few years ago was in Portsmouth Hospital. So I had the privilege of working with military nurses. And that's that thing that you said is a part of a family, and regardless, so it's not just army nurses, it's the RAF and it's the Navy nurses too, but nonetheless within that cohort you are a family. And I think the experience that NHS nurses get from working with military nurses is just there is no other offer like it. And even though you just described you're moving on every 6 months, but actually what you create, what additional opportunities you create for newly registered nurses, but also student nurses, is unbelievable. So you're in that role because you're in that role, but actually what you give to the NHS or other healthcare areas that you work is amazing. So I think you're fantastic role models for our new professionals coming through.
Thank you, Greta. And we've got a new member to our conversation as well, which is lovely. So Brendan, I have another question for you, and actually I'll confess I spoke to Teresa Shaw, who you know really well, and yes. I've got this opportunity to talk to Brendan and people will be here, and I said, what question would you ask? And this was Teresa's question, and it's very much around your passion for nursing in older adult settings. And she wanted me to ask you how you feel about how attitudes and practices have changed or not over that time that you've had this interest and commitment to that area of practice.
Yeah. Oh, nice to hear from Teresa, even seriously. Yeah, God, it's a huge question. Yeah, I mean, that's if I was to prioritize my passions in life, then older people services and gerontological nursing would be one or two, really, and has never shifted. So has it changed? I think some things have changed quite considerably, and I would put myself again in that mix. You know, as I said, started off as a mental health nurse. I loved mental health nursing. I hated the system of mental health nursing. That's why I left. And my career since, and I have said this so many times, is based on my experience on my first ward as a mental health student nurse, which was, as we all know back then, was psychogeriatrics. And it was abusive and inhuman, and I hadn't actually realized that for many years later, just the impact it had on me. You know, and actually that whole experience became the first chapter of my PhD. I used Irving Goffman's theory to unpick what went on in the institutions at that point and why it was we allowed it to happen and all that kind of stuff. And if you look at what we did then, and that was only 1980 really, most of us would have been struck off for our practices now. If we did those things now, we would no longer be registered. We would certainly be, you know, actually accused of abuse, and there'd be safeguarding going on. If you look at all those kind of things that did happen, they were shocking, really. And I don't feel, you know, at all proud of any of that. But it shows the power of a culture and a context at that time. Do I think those practices carry on? Yes, I think some of them do. And I think despite all the various quality regulations that exist, they're still able to carry on. And that's what's always interesting about it, how they're managed to, you know, these things exist when these scandals suddenly hit. It's suddenly realized in this particular nursing home or this setting, this has been going on despite regulations and quality systems. But what I think now is that they are more the exception than the rule, and that is where the shift has really happened. So it's not that we're incapable of those kind of things still happening, but I think so much has changed in the way that people understand really and have better engagement processes and better communication processes and know more about things like dementia, for example, about how to communicate effectively, you know, how to treat everybody as a person, and therefore how do we connect. you know, even today, one of my PhD students who's a music therapist, you know, she emailed me because she was so excited because she had a breakthrough, which is that in the service she works in a particular part of Scotland, she was asked by her manager to go to a meeting because they wanted to, quote, get rid of the challenging behavior protocol and look at how they could stop using that as a focus. She was so excited, and so was I, because at last, you know, and she's looking at how to use music therapy as a person-centered intervention with people at a particular stage in their dementia. But, you know, so even now we have things like challenging behavior, which we all know is a terrible term to place on anybody. So these things still kind of exist, but I think what there is a greater potential to challenge them, change them, and to move it on. But I also know that, and because I see it and I'm part of it, some amazing practice and relationships with older people where, you know, gerontological nurses do the most incredible job when they do it well. You know, we kind of bring together, exactly as Lucy was talking about earlier, kind of all of the essence of nursing into one single intervention. And I use that a lot when talking to student nurses, you know, when they talk about feeding patients, which I refuse to use. So I would go, oh, do you mean helping that person with their food? Is that what you're meaning? Because we feed animals, we don't feed persons. And so I, you know, say, so do you go feeding when you go out to dinner, or do you go and eat? So we have all these conversations. And what I try and I deconstruct these tasks. So if you take the task of helping somebody with dementia to eat their lunch, it has packed full of both cognitive, behavioral, really complex skills, all packed into that one single intervention of helping somebody to eat their food at a table in a way that is right for them. And it's not just a case of, you know, mushing up food and putting it on a spoon and putting it in somebody's mouth. It actually has this incredible collection of skills attached to it. And we do this a lot in our program with students, to deconstruct these so-called tasks into these complex activities that shows what it is that gerontological nurses do when they are doing this stuff. Because actually it's probably the essence of everything nursing is really about. And I know that is much more prevalent now, and I see it, and some of the programs of work that are going on is phenomenal, and it has shifted quite dramatically from way back then. And there's tons of examples, I think, of that happening. The caveat I have, and that's why I've never stopped being passionate about the person-centered development stuff, is that I think our potential to go back to some of those things is so strong, that, you know, we can easily slip back into tasked, routinized, ritualistic practices in a flash. It's so easy to just go back into that space without even thinking about it. Somebody today described it as the oil slick of negativism in a lecture I was giving, and I thought it's quite a powerful statement, and it is, you know, it's so, that oil slick can happen so quickly and take over so quickly, which is why we need roles like Lucy and all of the others who are on here, who are constantly questioning, challenging, making sure that we're not taking those things for granted.
Absolutely. And I wonder, Lucy, I know this is an area you're so passionate about as well. I wonder if you have anything you wanted to respond to Brendan there.
Yeah, so I moved out of the hospital setting. So I was in the hospital for a few years as an older person's practitioner. And yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think language within older people's healthcare is we're constantly challenging the use of the word elderly, the use of the words, things like acopia. So your junior doctor, when they're clerking someone at the front door of the hospital, may describe someone as acopia. Diagnosis falls. No, they didn't. That's not the diagnosis. Why did they fall? Failed discharge. Poor historian. No. the poor historian is the person who's getting the history. So yeah, and I think I even had one of my team the other day describe somebody as being totally demented. So I had to have kind of a kind of open discussion with them about, you know, a person's living with dementia, and you know, so and I think it's just how we challenge things, isn't it? So without being confrontational, and for people to and when you get things wrong yourself, so when you slip up yourself, you say, oh, you know, I can't believe I just said that was mental. You know, something was really busy and you might go, oh, it's mental today. Oh, that's actually really inappropriate language and it's not helpful language. So I think, the feeding is a really great example of so many examples which we are constantly banging the drum about. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. And I guess we're coming towards the end of our time now, and God, what a fascinating conversation. I think I know, how quickly has that gone? And I know that Greta, you wanted to just sum up and say a final few words before we finish.
Well, as I said at the start, this is our first one. We didn't know how many people were going to join on the call. We didn't know how good Brendan was going to be, or we had an idea he might be good. But certainly, thank you so much. You've absolutely captivated all of us at this time of the evening, including those that have got a glass of wine or sherry in their hand. So I really do thank you on behalf of the foundation for spending some time with us this evening and everybody joining in. And I'm sitting here listening, trying not to think that my mother's recently been admitted to an older person's ward or whatever it's called. It's not called an older person's ward, but we know the age group of the people she's now on a medical ward, and she fell, so she was a faller. And I can hear people saying that, and I just think, my goodness, I need Lucy to go and talk to the ward about her and the things that they say. But actually I was, because there's obviously no visiting, I took a bag I went with my sister to take a bag of clothes to her, and was greeted at the front door by the ward clerk, I think, and by her was somebody who looked like a nurse. And I said, is it possible to speak to a nurse, please? And this girl was just divine, and she said, I couldn't see a badge because it was twiddled around the wrong way. And she said, oh, I'm a nurse. And I said, oh, I wonder if we're so-and-so's daughters. Could you just tell us how she is? And she just rattled off everything about her from top to bottom in this most beautiful way. And I said, oh, that was just incredible. Thank you. That's made us feel so much better. I feel as if I could visualize her sitting on her chair next to the bed. I said, oh, how long have you been a nurse? And she said, well, actually, I just qualified. I qualified in September. And my little heart absolutely warmed up. And she said, yes, I was one of these aspirant nurses. And that wasn't so my mother's moved now, but she was on the acute medical unit at that time. And she said, I was there as a student nurse, and I volunteered to stay. And she said, and it's just incredible. I've felt absolutely part of this group, and I want to stay there. And I've had such amazing experience and support. And I thought, wow, but she was, I would say, just incredible anyway. But actually, even that's my experience of one nurse during. Oh, actually, I've got more experiences, but from a personal point of view. And the difference that person made to some relatives that couldn't come and see their mother, who's no idea what she looked like. But so this wasn't all about older people of a certain age and hospital care, but community care as well. But just to really say thank you for dialing in. Thank you for spending the evening with us, the early part of when particularly children want to go to bed. I can see that. But it's been a pleasure, and I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion, the conversation. And Brendan, thank you so much for being so transparent and open, and I think that absolutely gave people the permission to ask you some almost direct questions. And Gemma, thank you very much for chairing it. As Brendan said, don't think I've ever heard an introduction to somebody that's been so personal rather than, as you say, reading off Wikipedia. I did actually Google you, Brendan, and looked at what was in Wikipedia this afternoon. And I thought, well, there's no way that Gemma's going to possibly say that. So I'm glad she had a much more person-centered approach to introducing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everybody. And
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Speak with you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.